Hi there, I'm Piers Birmingham, the founder and chair of Politika. We recently have become the Radix Big Tent Youth Wing since the merger between our parent organisation, Radix, with Big Tent. A key part of what we aim to do here at Politika is convene conversations in a cross-party way about the issues that affect young people and giving young people a platform. The three areas we particularly want to look at where we feel young people are being let down is education, housing, and work. And throughout this discussion, we are focusing particularly on education and citizenship education, which I'm sure many of you will agree is very important. We've got a spectacular panel for this, so I'm now going to hand over to Jake, our managing director, to introduce himself. And he'll moderate the panel, and then we'll hand over to the rest of the panel to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hello, as Piers mentioned, I'm Jake. I'm the managing director of Politika. So I run Politika on a day-to-day basis, whereas Piers handles more of the long-term strategy things and our relationship with Big Tent and Radix. So I have been somewhat involved in the citizenship paper that we recently put out, and that's what we'll be discussing in large part today. And I'll be, due to the person who led the paper unfortunately being ill today, I'm standing in for them as well on the panel, as well as chairing. So I'll hand over to the next person now, whoever wants to speak.
I'll go. I'm Iain McNicol, Lord McNicol of West Kilbride. I came into the House of Lords in 2018. I'm now one of the deputy speakers. So straight after this panel, I'm onto the Woolsack and chairing Parliament. But before that, I was the General Secretary of the Labour Party. And then before that, student organiser, and I'm trade union organiser. It's a little bit strange being in the House of Lords, but I'm trying to push some of the issues that can hopefully make a difference, make some changes. Thank you.
I guess I'll I'll go next. My name is Matteo, and I run an organisation called Shout Out UK. We're a social enterprise that gets more young people engaged and involved in politics by running political literacy and media literacy programs in secondary schools and colleges. And what we mean by political literacy is the kind of bare bone basic understanding as to how our democracy functions. So understanding, what is the House of Lords? What is the House of Commons? How does a bill become a law? What is devolution? All the kind of bare bone basics that frankly should already be in every single school across the country, but for one reason or another isn't. And then media literacy, which is how to critically analyze the information we receive online, in the papers, on TV, or wherever else you get the information that then influences your voting decisions. As well as within that, obviously combating the sheer amount of dis and misinformation, which has become kind of really prevalent in our society. On top of that, we do a lot of democratic engagement works. We ran London Voter Registration Week for the GLA this year and last year. And we also are the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on political literacy, which also Lord McNicol is one of the co-chairs.
I'll go next. I'm India. I'm currently a student at Exeter University, and Piers found me from my time as a guest speaker with an organisation called Sit Down, Shut Up, who are Exeter based, and they run COVID-friendly protests for women's rights. So that's where Piers fished me out from.
Okay, so as I mentioned previously, Politika has recently put out a paper on improving citizenship education. So I guess my first question to the panel would be, what do you think is sort of the most important single thing we can do in improving citizenship education? And where can we really improve?
I can kick off if you'd like. Yeah, I mean the single thing that I think we could easily do to improve citizenship education is train teachers. We did a research. We did a bit of research with Sheffield University as part of the APPG on political literacy, and there's several interesting findings. But the main one was that less than 1% of teachers that we surveyed, and by the way, it was, I think, the biggest sample of teachers to have been conducted in a long time. I think about just over 3,000 teachers that we surveyed. But less than 1% believed that they had the tools and skills necessary to actually deliver quality political literacy education or citizenship education. So although the majority of teachers believed that was their duty and they wanted to deliver this work, they felt unable to do so because they didn't get the proper training required. So I think one of the easiest, simplest, although arguably cost-related ways to resolve this is by giving teachers training. And I think it's crazy that at the moment, for example, DFE gives bursaries for a number of different subjects. If a teacher wants to go into, for example, religious education or wants to deliver, maths, English, which obviously makes sense. But in terms of citizenship, there is no bursary. So it's very, very hard for a teacher to go into that kind of subject and to get the training they need to deliver that kind of work, which is crazy to me considering how, and I don't think anyone can disagree with this, but how toxic and difficult politics can be to teach at times. Especially with the kind of environments and the level of political tribalism we see at the moment. It's a subject that can be very, very toxic, very delicate, but it also can be very, very exciting and very empowering. So it needs to be taught properly. It needs to be delivered in a way that's confident, that teachers know how to do it properly, and that requires training. And there just isn't enough. So I think one of the main ways that we can deal with that is by giving teachers the tools they need.
Anyone else want to come in on that?
I'll jump off the back of that point. I also think the environment in which teachers are working are so key it's such a key developmental stage for young people. I think when you hit the age of about 15 or 16, that's when you start forming your own kind of thoughts outside of whatever nurture bubble you've been raised in. And I think it's so key, like there needs to be such an emphasis on teacher training and this lack of bias as well, I think, because you have teachers coming in, I've had teachers coming in who are not equipped, and whatever they are equipped with is naturally, of course, going to be biased to whatever they believe or whatever they vote or whatever kind of economical background that they come from. And I think what happens is this lack of education leads young people to just absorbing whatever their parents do. And then you end up having an echo chamber at home, which is also a big problem. And then you have these people taking on their parents' thoughts and bringing them back into a space where you could well have all of these different thoughts, but no one's got the ability to discuss it or debate it or talk about it or learn about it. And you have just kind of unhealthy silence on all of these topics and these walls that are just constantly built up.
So just to follow on from India and Matteo, the teacher training is obviously the key issue that would allow us to do it better, to deliver more of it, and to do it in a more structured and competent way, as India has touched on. One of the other things that sit with that is the space for it and the respect for the subject of political literacy or citizens education. One of the reasons that I got involved in politics was because in Scotland we had a GCSE and an O-level called Modern Studies, which was a proper GCSE. I don't think they really have the same equivalent in England and Wales. But what that did was that gave us the space in the classroom, as India is saying, to explore and develop our own thinking and our own ideas, and then work out where our political beliefs fitted in to that. Matteo touched on the APPG, and I think this is probably something, Jake, and you may want to come back to about the issue of political bias. But the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Political Literacy, is chaired by myself, who's a Labour politician, co-chaired, and by Simon Fell, who's Conservative. And for us working with Shout Out, that was really important, that there was both Conservatives and Labour, and there are Liberals and some of the other parties involved within it as well. But it was really important that across the idea of political literacy, it was in an unbiased information, and it's about the building up of the skill set of critical analysis, and that flows into so many other areas that I'm sure we'll touch on as well. But training the teachers, making sure that they have the workbooks, the documents, the information, to deliver the lessons in a structured and unbiased way, and then in the classroom, the space. So it isn't just a 1 hour add-on once a week or once a month. It's core and it's central, because it's so important.
So the next thing that I would like to explore is, India seems to have left. But the next thing I'd like to explore is YouGov polling from last year indicates that 63% of people think that teaching citizenship education in schools is important. With that being the case, how do we move citizenship education as a priority up the agenda?
So, I mean, it's interesting that I saw that in the policy debate that you guys put together, and it correlates with the research that we did with Sheffield, where and for us it wasn't just people, it was we ended up surveying teachers and parents as well, and both of them overwhelmingly said that they support the teaching of citizenship, political literacy, call it what you want, in schools. How do we get to there is, I think, twofold. I mean, the APPG on political literacy next year, we're going to be pushing and engaging with DFE as well as other government departments to try and show how and why this is such a priority, especially at a time now where, I don't think anyone can argue that young people aren't politically active. Like, young people are probably more politically active, more politically engaged than they've ever been. And are probably more interested now in knowing about how their government works than they've ever been, partly due to climate change, partly due to mental health, the mental health crisis that we're living under, partly due to the pandemic and the impact it's going to have on their lives, not just now, but also economically for years to come. So young people want this information. Parents want it to be in schools. Teachers want to deliver it, but require the tools necessary to do so. So I think the main thing that we need to do is to, one, have a conversation with DFE to see how they can make sure that this is a thing, as well as other departments that are working with young people. So DCMS, I know, are very, very open and supportive about work around political education. But more so, I think what we need to show, not just government, but I think the general public, is that political literacy is non-partisan, which is something that Lord Iain mentioned, which is that at the moment we're living in as I said before, a very toxic time where politics can be very, very kind of, the left blame the right blame the left, and that serves absolutely zero purpose other than making the whole environment toxic for everybody. We need to protect political literacy and citizenship from that toxicity and show that actually, whether you're Conservative, whether you're Labour, whether you're Lib Dem, whether you're SNP, whether you're UKIP, whatever creed or colour you subscribe to, protecting and amplifying democracy, which is essentially what it is, by teaching people how it works, is paramount to anybody that works within or wants to change that system for the better. And that is something that is apolitical, that everyone should subscribe to, and nobody can really disagree with. And I think that's the kind of messaging we need to carry on pushing through the media, through any political party, through parliament, through government, that this is something that, regardless of what creed you subscribe to make sure these debates can carry on happening, we need to teach people how their system works. So making sure that it's an apolitical conversation and that it's about the betterment of democracy is, I think, the first step. Because at the moment, some of the conversations that we've had and some of the media examples that we've seen is that people try and turn it into a political football, the left blaming the right and the right saying, oh, you're indoctrinating kids to become left-wing or vice versa. And that is just completely unhelpful. And, the MPs and the laws that we've got on the APPG on political literacy are absolutely amazing in combating this. But we need more. We need support from the public, we need support from third sector, and we need support from Parliament to make sure that that narrative stays that narrative.
So, Jay, just to follow on, the question was about how do we deliver it and do it better, and that's about prioritization. It's about prioritizing it because it's not part of the core curriculum just now. We just lost India from Exeter. I think it was a poor connection on her line, so hopefully I will get India back on, because one of the things that I think would be interesting to explore with India is about the localization of it, and and as we speak, she's joining. She's joining back in. It is welcome back, India. I was filling for time until you joined us again. So Matteo was just taking us through some of the practical bits of work that, whether it's the Department for Education, whether it's local government can do to try and bring more support in for political literacy and political education. One of the questions that I was keen to develop, taking Jake's question, was your engagement and involvement has been very much at a local level. In Exeter during COVID. I don't think that, and I've never believed that political education is about the big political debates between Boris and Keir, or at a national level. Obviously that's a bit of it, and being able to critically analyze and teaching young people the skills and how to critically analyze and look at the information in front of them is part of it. But actually just showing how politics, whether it's from the left or from the right or from the centre, actually makes a difference to people's lives, is the way that you can engage and you can involve people, more people and younger people within it. And it doesn't have to be a big political issue. It can be a very small local issue, but is important to your community or to your area.
Oh,
you're on mute, India.
Sorry, I'm in and out, so I'm just waiting for it to come back, but I think it's back now. Yeah, from what I could gather, sorry, it was cutting in and out. I think there's a big level of polarization. I think when I was at school particularly, I did politics A-level, so I felt like I was several steps ahead of my peers, which again shouldn't have been the case. And I think the only thing that was ever really prevalent about politics was that if there were girls who were more left-leaning or right-leaning, it was a case of they didn't know about politics, they just knew that they hated the Tories, and they didn't know, and then on the left side on the right side it was they didn't know anything about politics, they just knew that they should probably hate the left. And there was no discussion, and there was no, and it's very difficult. That's why I'm so drawn to Politika, it's so much deeper than left and right, and it's so much more complex. And it's such a shame that I was one of the youngest at school, so I'm end of August, and I went to an all-girls school, and there was such a great opportunity to get young women excited about policies that are directly affecting them, about policies that affect their bodies and affect what they can do and where they can go, and all of these glass ceilings. And I just think it was one huge missed opportunity to get people genuinely excited about or passionate and get something to drive them. And it's because of that polarization. There would be girls who came from much upper class backgrounds or higher class backgrounds who were like, well, I just know that my parents vote Tory, so that's what I'm going to do. And then there'd be women who, particularly myself included, my dad has never been anything other than Labour his entire life. And so I felt like I wanted to say, I felt like I was branded as well, we're not going to argue with you because you need like left-wing stuff. And I'm like, so there's so many other parties that you can vote, like there's so many other layers that you need to open yourself to. And I just felt it's not their fault because they've gone through a whole system of not needing to know or not ever being told. It can start with like the tiniest thing, the tiniest local level thing. And Philip Hammond came to my school and everyone was like, I don't know who this is. And it's like, oh dear. That's your first way in. You are met face to face with a member of parliament at the time. And it's such a lot of missed opportunities, I think. That's why I'm very passionate about it.
So do you think it should have started, sorry, Jake, do you think it should have started earlier or younger? And not about the sort of the bigger political issues, but just an understanding of the fact that politics can make a difference. I think the thing that sort of upsets me the most when I do the schools, which has been a lot harder, obviously through COVID, and it's not very often. But every now and again you get, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. And it's just like, it does. There's a big difference across the political spectrum. But I just wonder if it's something that we should look at starting in terms of the discussions and the debates a bit younger.
Yeah, I think I had no idea about any sort of political standing that I might have until I did politics. And that was very off the bat. I don't know where that came from. I just picked it. And I think I'm very glad I did. And I think had I been younger, when I would tell people about what I was doing and what was on my politics curriculum, and they would get really excited about it, but then there was always this level of apathy, always this level of like, oh, but what's the point? What can we do about it? And what's even more frustrating is the people that would say that were the people with the most privilege to probably go and do something about it. And I think it's hard, because if somebody isn't interested in something, they're not interested in something, and that's fine. But I think for every one person there is like that, there's 10 people who aren't, but just don't know it. And I think it feels very heavy. I think when you present it to young people, it feels like a heavy topic, and it feels like a topic that everybody says, oh, I know it's so bad, and I know I should do something about this, and I know I should learn about this, but it's so much, it's so confusing. And I think it's drip feeding. So going through a way of a little bit starting maybe when you're in year 9, a little bit starting when you're in year 10, and because I think those are key moments where you begin to become your own person. And I also think I'm very big on political theatre. That's kind of what I major in my degree. And I think you can disguise so many things in theatre, and maybe doing a citizenship module and mixing it with a drama class, and having this level of people can watch something at the theatre and laugh at it and enjoy it and love it, and then walk away and think, oh wow, this means something completely different. And I think one of the big name things like that is Hamilton, and this idea of putting people of colour at the forefront of a show. And I've studied that, and I do post-colonial modules, and I think young kids love that. They eat that up all the time. Every time I teach young kids theatre, I hear them singing all these songs, and I think good on you, because as soon as you hit about 16, you're going to realise what all of this means. And I think it's right there, it's right in front of people's faces, is this idea of disguising it, and then once you get to a certain age being like, oh, look at that, everything's mapped out for you and everything's come together and you've got all these tools, do what you will with them, I suppose.
Just to chime in, as sort of also a university student and someone who also did politics A-level, I got interested a little bit earlier, but anything sort of pre-politics A-level, was very self-guided, and it was just, I don't really remember why, I happened to get interested in politics, and I sort of learned it all myself. An actual political education from, say, year 7 or year 9 or even earlier would have been an absolute godsend, because I think a lot of people, if you even just look at things that people post to Instagram or Twitter or whatever, a lot of people have that sort of level of wanting to be involved in politics. A lot of people, because they're not taught all that much about it, occasionally fall into traps of misinformation or disinformation. But I think that's something that could really, really be fixed through comprehensive citizenship education. In fact, Matteo and Iain, it'd be great to hear a bit from you about the work to combat bias and disinformation and misinformation within what the APPG is doing, and how we can ensure there's objectivity within citizenship education.
So I'll kick off a little bit. I thought India's point about a political theatre, and she was talking about Hamilton. You don't get more political than Les Miserables, and again, the music, the story is just fantastic, and Hamilton is as well. One of the things that I think is quite interesting is in your Politika paper on improving citizenship education, it chimes very closely with a lot of the work that both the all-party parliamentary group, the APPG on political literacy, and the work that Shout Out, the organisation that Matteo runs, has been doing. And interestingly, you don't just, in your paper and through the other bits, we don't just talk about political literacy or political education. We also talk about economic literacy, and there's another part of yours about talking about how to look at statistics, because statistics can be written to virtually say whatever you want them to say, and that's never been more critical than it is just now with COVID. And then we saw a bit only 5 years ago now, 2016, 2017, when they were saying that experts, we've had enough of experts, they don't matter. But actually, experts do matter, but how all of us, whether it's someone who is in year 7, 8 or 9 or older, or an adult, looks at that information and analyzes, and what they take from that information is really important. So one of the things that Shout Out helped organise and basically ran was a political literacy day, and we had different seminars with different people. And one of the organisations that we got in, and it's worth having a look at them, they're called Lie Detector, and it's a European one. It's not funded by the EU. It's funded by a donor who wants to help support and basically help young people be able to critically analyse the media and the information, whichever format it is, that's coming through to them. And so much of it now is not on the radio or on the newspapers. It's on our smartphones. And Lie Detector go into schools with properly trained ex-journalists, and they teach the students, the young people, basically how to look at a piece of information and work out and question why am I seeing that? Why is it being shared with me? Why is somebody, and when you start to think about why somebody is sending it to you, then you're one step closer to understanding what perspective it is coming from. So that's a small example. Matteo, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about the work programme for the APPG and about the political literacy day, but it was about raising the profile, and your Politika paper and the Radix Youth Wing work, that all helps support it and just drive the discussions and the debates.
Yeah, no, definitely. If I may add, and I think in your policy paper, you do say that political engagement, media literacy, and economic understanding should be considered important educational goals. Which I couldn't agree with more. Economic understanding for obvious reasons. Whenever we talk about political literacy, we always include media literacy, because it's one thing understanding how our democracy functions. But if you don't know how to critically analyze the information to then make informed voting decisions, you're kind of stuck. You need both. We as an organization have been working in the media literacy space for a while. We've done a lot of work, especially during COVID, to combat primarily conspiracy theories. We ran a whole media minded podcast, which is on all major platforms now, shameless plug.
I'll make sure that we have that linked down below once this is all uploaded.
Yeah, sure. Amazing. And we've actually just got recommissioned to do a second season of it, focused primarily on conspiracy theories of a number of different avenues. But the first season was interviewing journalists basically across the board on how they were covering the pandemic and how they were dealing with misinformation and how they were trying to like navigate the landscape. And what was interesting was that, especially at the beginning of COVID, if you allow me to explain a little bit, is that when there is a gap of information, that's when misinformation and disinformation thrive the most, because obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't quite know what was going on. Governments were still scrambling. Journalists were scrambled to get information that just didn't exist yet. But people panic, and we as individuals, and we all do it, let's be honest, we want to get information now. We don't want it tomorrow. We don't want it in 2 hours. We want it now, immediately. And the kind of how factually based that information is kind of almost secondary. And that's where kind of disinformation thrives, which is why we saw so much mis and disinformation during the pandemic. And one of the things that we need to do as a society, which is one of the things that the APPG on political literacy is going to be doing, is as we're hopefully going to try and instill political literacy either through citizenship or somewhere else into the curriculum as a core subject, as something that every school must and needs to do and can do because they're given the tools and the consideration in the curriculum. That will also instill the critical thinking skills that young people need to then be able to make sense of the media landscape and the digital landscape. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about media literacy, it's a fancy word for critical thinking skills, let's be honest. It's just about being able to look at something and not be emotionally drawn to it, but like a moth to a flame, because you either dislike or really like that thing. Because if we think about, say, I don't know, if you guys were to ask me what kind of dessert am I going to have for dinner tonight, I'm probably going to say something to do with chocolate, just because that's my bias. I like chocolate. That's the thing. That is a bias I have. We all have internal biases towards a certain something, and if it's in regards to food, it's relatively harmless. But biases can become harmful when it comes to nationalities, races, creeds, religions, etc. We all need to be aware of what our biases are, and that online content can sometimes, more often than not, play on those biases that we have. And then because of social media aggregation, the more you click on a bias that you like, or the more you click on something that you want to believe to be true, the more it shows you those same stories that reinforce that belief. And eventually you end up living in this ridiculous digital echo chamber, which you think is the real world, because you think, oh, well, I'm online, I'm looking at 10 different sources. And they say, well, yeah, if all those 10 different sources are saying the same thing, yes, you're looking at varied news content, but it's not really varied. It's about understanding how to critically analyze and dissect what is happening online, and being able to critically analyze each individual story to say, well, what are the triggers for that story? Like if you see an article, for example, online, what triggers should you have in your mind to be like, how real is this story? Should I really share it, or should I dig a little deeper? Because we don't want to do it for every story, but if we start to have little triggers, we can start to develop a mindset of, well, this is relatively believable, this is. And that is something that just needs to be in schools, because we need to, it's almost like an etiquette of how we deal with things online. We all develop a hygiene when we grow up, like you don't wait to go to work and for someone in Iain's office to turn around and say to him, Iain, like you got a shower, man. Like it was not okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't wait for someone to tell you that. You shower regularly, and you were taught this as a child, to shower regularly, keep yourself clean, because it's a good thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do. We need to develop the same type of attitude when it comes to our minds and how we deal with online information. We need to consistently re-educate ourselves to keep essentially our opinions hygienic, to not start to spread that misinformation. And that is something that is consistent, but we need to start instilling those behaviors in school. And that's where the importance of pushing citizenship in schools comes in, because citizenship, political literacy automatically brings in critical thinking skills, which is the only way you're going to combat disinformation in the long run.
Further to that, what is sort of the way essentially to help people break out of that echo chamber and realize that they're in an echo chamber. A lot of people I know it's probably a pretty difficult job, but a lot of people sort of assume that younger people are more susceptible to it. And while younger people are susceptible, there's a lot to show that actually, if anything, it's older people who will buy into anything they see on Facebook. So beyond that, how do we ensure that younger people are then helping, say, their older relatives realize that something from truth.com on Facebook might not actually be true?
That's a great that's a great question. I'd be really interested to hear India's take on it. Because you're right about the echo chamber that people find themselves in, especially with the social media. But I don't think I really don't like blaming the social media. For me, it's about what is it that we can do to help. So actually, do you know what? This discussion, the paper that you've pulled together, the working with the Radix Big Ten, all of that, the work that India's doing down in, or the volunteering or the campaigning that India's doing down in Exeter, all of those little bits all help. And it's, for me, it's about challenging the situation or the thoughts. And if there's no challenge to the way any of us think, whether it's all of us in the Labour Party or the Liberals or the Conservatives or outside of that, if there's no challenge to your views and all you're getting is a feedback that is saying what you're thinking is right, and then it's doubling down on it, then that's the bit that gets dangerous. So it's about, it all comes back down to the critical thinking, and it all comes back down to the space to challenge and the space to discuss and debate. Because none of us on this call have all of the answers. We've all got different life experiences. We've all got different educational experiences. I didn't go to university, but I've ended up in here. But the skills that I picked up from doing the campaigning and the community organising bring a different set of values and a different way of looking at things. So for me, it's about trying to experience as many different situations and viewpoints as possible, and then that helps me work out what I think is right and what I think is wrong. And if we can help, and you're right, Jake, it isn't just younger people. There's so many sort of middle-aged and older people who are in these echo chambers, and the information is just getting replayed to them, and their thinking just gets redoubled. So it's about how we help break that, and it all comes down to education.
India?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, off the back of this idea of an echo chamber as well, it creates a safe space, and I think safe spaces can be really good when they're used effectively, but I don't think it doesn't start a discussion. It doesn't spark that flame for people to start speaking. And I think I've seen it in practice. I've been working on political theatre at the moment, which explores sexual assault, and I had a woman come to me and say, I want it to be an all-male audience with watching two women on stage. And I said, that's really interesting, but who there is going to start the conversation? Because they can be as forward as they like, but if you sit in a room with all of the people that share the same views as you, or aren't educated enough on those views, no one starts a conversation. And I think it comes from, one of the key moments it can come from in education is role play. Because I think if you're met with a room full of children or students who all broadly believe the same things and the same values and the same ideals on race, gender, sexuality, all of those more social views, spark a debate. And I found that at my school. My politics class had a Muslim girl, a Sri Lankan girl, two queer women, a transgender man, and because we were such a diverse room, everyone thought the same thing. So we role played, and we were given a sheet of paper that said, this is your background, these are your views, argue them. And I couldn't, and I'd get frustrated myself, but I'd learn. And I think you can so easily working with students who are maybe 13 or 14, putting them in small groups, having a teacher that's there to facilitate a safe space and a safe room for you to, and to kind of reinforcing that this room isn't what you think, it's what you could well be met with in 3, 4, 5 years down the line, and this is how you deal with it, this is how you're equipped to deal with it, and this is how you pick flaws, but also look for things that you agree with, and it all just furthers development.
We could do with getting some of the politicians to do that, putting them into different roles, having to argue the exact opposite.
Matteo?
Yeah, no, just bearing in mind time, and just to add a couple of things to echo both India and Ian's point, and touching on what you were saying about how to break people out of echo chambers. And I guess from my perspective, we're looking at, when we say echo chambers, we're looking at people that are potentially involved or kind of gearing down the road of conspiracy theories, or those kind of like, because echo chambers, I mean, they're often, I would say, negative, but some are more harmful than others, and especially when they get into toxic echo chambers, like, for example, the 5G conspiracy theory, or, you know, believing that Bill Gates is behind COVID, or any other manner of insane conspiracy theory that has absolutely no basis in reality. And the one thing I'd say, first of all, is that it's incredibly hard, and it's almost like the way we kind of see it is almost like a cult, where it's much easier to warn people and arm people to recognize and stay away from cults than it is to then drag someone out once they're finally in one. And the best thing that we can do when you have someone that is in an echo chamber, or that is in one of those toxic echo chambers, is, ironically enough, compassion and empathy, realistically. Because it's like, if I look at my own personal perspective as a European, and, you know, someone is, say, xenophobic towards me, it's very easy for me to call them a xenophobe, to call them a bigot. Like, it makes me feel good, and, you know, it creates confrontation. But the reality is, what are you doing? What are you having that conversation for? Because calling someone, you know, a xenophobe, or calling someone a bigot, or calling someone whatever words you want under the sun, may make you feel good, but in reality, it's not going to necessarily change their mind. And quite often, the harder but more productive conversation is having that empathy to try and listen to why they believe that thing, why they have that view, and where it comes from. And often what you end up finding is, if they're given the space to have that conversation and to realize that there is an empathetic ear outside of their environment, or outside of their bubble, essentially, they then start to unpick these kind of thought processes themselves, and you can help them building that kind of trust to then unpick it for themselves as well. It's a very laborious thing, and it's incredibly hard, and it's incredibly emotionally draining. But if you really want to drag that person out, that's the way to do it. It's also, you know, looking at it from their perspective, because quite often people that are in those conspiracy theories long enough end up isolating themselves from their friends, from their family, from their work colleagues. Like, they have nobody other than the people that believe that same thing. So for them to stop believing that thing means leaving themselves completely alone and isolated. And nobody really wants that. Like, even if they don't believe that thing, they're letting go of all their friends and all the people that they have close to them in that community. So to make that pretty arguably courageous step, they need to know that there is someone on the other end, you know, the majority of society, that is willing to welcome them and have that conversation. And again, it can be incredibly frustrating, and some of the things they can say are insanely offensive and crazy. But the reality is that that's really the only way of attempting to bring someone back, is having that empathy and that willingness to listen, or don't have the conversation with them, because confrontation just pushes them deeper and deeper into the hole, I'd say.
Unless there's anything anyone else would like to add on that question, we'll move now to sort of closing statements, i.e. if there's any sort of, well, essentially what people see as kind of the most important takeaway and what they'd really like to hammer home. We'll start with India.
I think the key point that you can take from this is that if it comes from a younger moment and a younger stage in development, it's so ingrained, and it's before you can be drawn into certain aspects of echo chambers or safe spaces or single opinions, you already know the key red flags to look for before you're in it. And I think that would make it a lot easier, instead of trying to drag everybody out of those places, having a preventative attitude towards it in the education system.
Matteo?
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. You think after a year and a half of doing this, you wouldn't make those same mistakes, but there you go. I'd say the only thing I really want to realistically add is that, again, I think if there was ever a time to have this kind of conversation and to push through this this change in our educational system to ensure that political and media literacy were to be taught in schools, I'd say it's now. Now, because COVID has given us quite a rare moment where it's kind of shown, for better or for worse, how politics impacts absolutely everything we do in our lives. And if we're ever going to take a slight silver lining of the utter madness that this virus has inflicted on our society, it's that people are probably more glued to their TVs listening to Parliament and Boris Johnson than they've probably ever been, realistically. So if there was ever a time to say we need to, for lack of a better term, build back better, to quote, is now. And that requires, people that are critical thinkers in terms of where they get their information from, because I don't think anyone in the WHO or NHS England will argue that people don't need better critical thinking skills. They really do. And, to better understand how government makes decisions will make people feel more comfortable when they're told to stay indoors for health and safety reasons. When it comes to lockdowns, for example, if people were more aware as to how Parliament came to these decisions, people will be less likely to scream, oh, it's a fascist state, when in reality, it is not a fascist state. It is made democratically by people that we elect for the betterment of public health. But again, if you don't necessarily understand the processes of how things work, you naturally jump to quite aggressive conclusions, because you would. But I think it's important now to have these kind of conversations. And, if we ever were to take a silver lining, is that we need to bring political and media literacy to schools.
To be fair, Jake, I think both India and Matteo have covered all of the major points. For me, it's basically the work that you've done to create this event and actually getting a group of people discussing citizenship education and political literacy. The more we can do of this, the more we can discuss it, then the better. I think through the Department for Education, if we can create the space and the respect for citizenship education and political literacy and media literacy training, and make sure that the teachers providing it are properly trained and resourced, then we're halfway there. But just a big thank you to yourselves and to Radix, Big Tent, for pulling this event together. I'm going to have to go because we're just about to vote. So democracy in action. And I am chairing Parliament in 4 minutes time. So just a huge big thank you. And just keep doing these events. Thank you.
Before we go, I'll let anyone who doesn't have to chair Parliament in 4 minutes, if they want to, if either India or Matteo, if either of you want to plug anything to do with shout out or the work you've been doing in India before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll just plug Sit Down, Shut Up, because we've had quite a lot of walls that we've been meeting, but it's chaired by 2 people, and it came about when there were lots of murders around Exeter of young women and lots of rapes that were coming about, and equally when we had the emergence of the pro-life society at Exeter, and it's there to fight and wreak havoc. We are there to start these conversations, and I think it came as quite a shock because Exeter is renowned as one big echo chamber, and it came as a shock for a lot of people who were stuck in these echo chambers, and I think myself included. In a theatrical environment, everybody's of the same opinion, and so it was a wake-up call, and they're doing some really great work, and they're making some big moves politically at the moment. So yeah, if you've got a chance, just check them out.
And Matteo?
And yeah, I mean, if you want to get involved with Shout Out UK, then you can visit us at shoutoutuk.org. Follow us on socials at Shout Out UK, and on our website you can also see details about the APPG on political literacy. But the main thing, I think, if you want to support or help, is to contact your local MP and push them to supporting political and media literacy. Because again, the more people that are supporting politicians outside of Parliament, the more voice they have within Parliament.
Could you mention a bit more about that podcast?
To think
about media
can be said about any cause.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I think the connection got a bit weird. Could you mention a bit more about the podcast you said about earlier?
Yes, so the podcast is called Media Minded, and you can find it on all major podcasting platforms, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a bunch of other places. I think those are the only 2 that matter, not to be rude among the rest. But it's a podcast that kind of delves into the crazy world of conspiracy theories and trying to understand how journalists were going through the pandemic and how they're trying to cover conspiracy theories and the COVID pandemic, whilst also trying to deal with themselves, the fact that there was very little information. We have interviews with journalists from Estonia, for example, who managed to uncover the fact that a couple of independent news sites were actually funded by the Russian government, to interviews with journalists from, say, Italy that were dealing with the madness that was going on with in Bergamo at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, as well as journalists from across the various other countries across the world. And the new season coming up, which is going to be launching in 2022, is with academics and former conspiracy theorists looking at how to tackle conspiracy theories and how the 2 sectors can kind of come together. So not sectors, but how 2 groups can come together to basically help inoculate people against the utter madness that is the conspiracy theory, for lack of a better word, pandemic that's currently going on in our minds.
And last but not least, I'll let Piers just quickly plug Politika and Radix Big Tent.
Yeah, please do check out the work Politika does and the work newly formed Radix Big Tent are doing. A lot of work around regeneration. Over the summer, a summit and a festival were held in Coventry, and next year that will be in Bristol, which we're very excited for. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.